Alright, so for this part, we are going to take a look at our SSIS package. The purpose of this package is to update the tables we have in our database. And before we jump into our containers, I want to say that this part here wasn't too challenging. I worked with SSIS before, but not to the extent of this project. Uh, I do want to say again, I'm not an expert in using SSIS, and I did encounter my fair share of issues. And SSIS during this project was very finicky. It's a lot of requirements you need to have, and that's why we have our macro VBA file, to format our files correctly so that this SSIS package can actually run to completion. And again, just with like any project relating to programming or of this area, the main thing in my case, and maybe for other people cases, are going to be to figure out when you come across a coding error, what does it mean and how can you fix it? Because this is a project that I've never done before or really seen anyone else do before. So I'm going to come across error codes I've never seen before, even though I've used these programs in school or even at work. So you can see our first container we have is called deleted fidelity record, and it's going to delete the previous data for fidelity. Now the thing about this data flow task is that for some reason it doesn't actually work. And that is the main reason why we had to create the store procedure called deleting fidelity records in SSMS using the SQL Server agent. You can see here that the SQL command is the exact same one as in the one in the store procedure, but for some reason, whenever I ran this SSIS package, it just didn't seem to run. I even made sure that SSIS had the ability to modify tables in my database, but even with that, it just didn't seem to work at all. Now, I've used a SQL command within a data flow task, and it worked before because I originally created my tables in SSIS using the SQL command or the OLDB command. But I just decided to leave this data flow task here because even though it doesn't really do anything, I don't think it really hurts the performance of this package either. Everything still runs fine from what I could see. So we have a second container. So after that first container is done, after the fidelity records are dropped, we are then going to update or move on to the update in tables container. But before we do that and jump into the first data flow task in that container, I want to take a look at the connection managers. This section right here will allow you to connect to a database, connect to a flat file source, or even an Excel file. As well, it allows you to output a certain file format, so CSV, text file, or even Excel, as I mentioned earlier. So not all of these connection managers or files are used in our package. Some of these we do use, but the others that we don't use, they are there for testing purposes. But let's move on to the first data flow task within the second container. So you can see here we have a flat file source, and then it is going to do a lookup. And how we want to handle that lookup is that we are going to redirect the rows that have no match between the original flat file and our database table that we specify to the match output. So this is the table in the database we are looking at. It is going to be called stock test, the database stock test, and then the table of stock name. If we move on to the column section, you can see that the name for our flat file matches with the name in our database table. This is how the lookup is performed. It is going to look at the columns that matches with each other and see if they have the same columns in both files or in none. And for some of the other data flow tasks like this one here, we have to do a data conversion. What this means is that the data type in our flat file source is not the same as the one in our destination or our database table. So when we have found the rows that have no matching output to our database table, we are then going to perform a data conversion task. We do this because our data types in the flat file source are different from the one in our database table. To give a quick example, let's say in our flat file source, which is called stock name, we have the column of stock symbol. And the column of stock symbol has a data type of string. But in our database table, we have the same column name, stock symbol, but its data type is nvarchar. What we would have to do is convert the data type in the flat file source to the data type in our destination table. So this is where the data conversion task comes in. If we do not have matching data types between the flat file source and the destination source, then we are not able to import new rows, and basically this package will fail. And now we could take a look at our OLDB destination. So this is our database that we have here, and you can see the table it is going to connect to is called stock name. We just have to make sure that the mappings are right for the source and the destination, and then everything should work fine. We also have the option to view existing rows in our destination table. And that's basically it for this data flow task, and a lot of the other data flows are going to follow the same concept. Pretty much straightforward, but the process behind getting everything to work took some time, and again it had some challenges along the way. So the next data flow task that we have is called update sector, and this is going to update our sector and industry table, which is just one table. So you can see here that we have a couple of warnings, but whenever I run this package, the warnings doesn't seem to affect how this package is ran, and it still runs to completion. I've had other warnings before and I've fixed them, but for this data flow task, it doesn't seem to be that big of an issue. The package itself still runs fine and all the tables are updated. So our source file is in the format of an Excel file. So you can see here we have the option to preview our data, and that's what we're going to do right now. So this is what the data looks like in the Excel file that we have. And just like the previous data flow task we looked at earlier, it's going to follow the same concept, but this time we are going to have the data conversion first. But other than that, it's the same steps, and the table we are connecting to is called stock sector, and this is what the table looks like in our database. And this table is only updated if there are no matching rows between the source file and the destination file, or the destination source, which is our database table. The next data flow task we have is called update stock news. And like the name says, it's going to be updating the stock news file or the table in our database. So this one is a little bit different from the two data flow tasks that we looked at earlier, but I'll go over the common path that we had viewed before, which is we start with a data conversion, and then we do a lookup no match, and then it gets sent to the source table. And this table is the stock news table that we have in our database. And that's basically it for the rows that have no matching output, again, between the source file and the destination file. The other path we are going to take a look at is the path with the red arrow first. So if there are any errors in the source file, we are then going to do a data conversion, and then it gets sent to a flat file destination. Basically, it's going to get sent to a text file. These are basically the rows that have an error with them and are not able to be imported into our database table. The last time I checked this file, it only contained one row, and the reason for that is because when Python did its web search, The specific stock symbol that it kind of messed up on was for Kemet, which is KEM, and the headline for it was way too long for our database to handle. So our database wouldn't take that headline. So that row would be automatically rejected and the whole package will end up failing. So because of this and because of the article that Python pulled had no relation to the stock market, I decided to output that row into a text file. And because of that, all of the other rows can be successfully imported into that correct table. The next data flow task that we have is called update stock history. This data flow task is going to take that massive file that we had with all the stock information and update our destination table, which is called stock history in our database. And about 2 months ago, at the time of recording this video, I had a weird error where the lookup no match was not performing properly. For some reason, it was trying to import rows that were already in our database, and because of this, I was getting an error. So as a result, for those rows that were giving me errors and I made sure they were in the database already, I created a fat file destination that those rows that gave us an error, they get sent to a text file. I think it's about a couple thousand rows, but I've confirmed and checked that those rows already exist in our data set. So it's not really a need to have them be imported again. But this is the name of the file. It's just a simple text file. I don't do nothing with it because I don't really need it. And it's just there so that the package could run to completion. I do want to note as well, if you have a data flow task that fails, there are multiple ways of handling how you want it to proceed. The most common one in my case was that if a data flow task failed, then the whole package will not update the tables in the database. Or some of the cases that we've seen earlier, if you have a data flow task that is repeatedly failing, you could have the rows that are giving you error sent to a text file so that those rows are avoided when updating the database, and that way the whole package can run. But everyone's case is different and it really depends on the situation. So now we have our Fidelity benchmark data flow task, and as we've seen before, it's following the same format or the same concept. The rows that it does not have a match with, those rows are going to be imported. But with this table, we delete all of the rows from the table, so basically all the rows will be imported. So there's really not much else to say here for this data flow task. It's just going to follow the same concept as the others. And then for our last data flow task, we have the update GDP data. This data should be updated annually. I'll probably have to put in the numbers manually because it's probably simpler that way. And then SSIS will just run the package and update the table. Again, using the lookup task and where the rows do not match our source file and the destination table in our database. And that's basically it for this container. Container number 2 does about 99% of the work here. I also want to mention that the arrows represent the order the data flow tasks are going to be ran. And we're going to see that in a couple of seconds when I run the package. So we are about to start the package, and this package takes about a minute or two, maybe even less, to run to completion. It's going to start with container 1 and then move on to container 2. And I'm just going to let this process run without me doing any talking or anything. Okay, the package is completed, and even with my computer being a bit slow, it only really took about a minute or maybe a minute and a half for this whole thing to run. So it's not going to take that long, and especially when we have over 700,000 rows in one of our data sets, I think that's pretty impressive. And again, we have a warning, but the warning did not affect the completion of the package. Now, if we seen a red X next to one of the data flow tasks, then we would be in some issues. But for the most part, this package runs fine and it's very reliable for me whenever I need to update the database. I also want to note that the data has already been updated previous to me running this package, so there aren't any new data being imported into our database. So that is basically it for this SSIS package. And this is going to run from Monday through Friday at around 5 o'clock, I believe.